All right, Cass, we're excited that we're doing this with all of the technological savvy that we have. So, for those of you that don't know, my name is Stevie. I am an associate professor at the college at Brockport in the Department of Dance, which sounds overly pretentious at SUNY Brockport. And right, today we're excited that we're talking this, to an alum, all of the technological Cass savvy Burns. That we have. So for those of you that don't know, great. Sound is off. And so I'm going to turn it over to Cass and ask them to introduce themselves a little bit, and then away we go.
Yeah, so I'm Cass, as Stevie said, also MFA alum from Brockport. So I've been spending past week already, wow, just talking about dance on camera, and then excited to tonight get to talk a little bit about how all of that camera work informs the work that I make on stage. So I actually don't make dance films, but that's what I'm always end up teaching. So it's always an interesting thing, but they're super related. So excited to get to chat about that. I made a video in iMovie, even though I hate iMovie. Just kind of put the introduction in there, so I'll just play it, but it's about 25 minutes, just talking about my process, showing a lot of different rehearsal videos, some excerpts of stage works, and then at the end, really excited to open it up to like a Q&A with people, whether you're on YouTube. Stevie tells me that you can type stuff right into YouTube, or you can hop back on this Zoom call when it's over and we can chat on Zoom. So totally up to you, but I'll set up my screen share. And here we go.
Hey everyone, welcome to Dance Technology and the Creative Process. I'm Cass, one of this year's Brockport Summer Dance guest artists, and tonight I'm going to be talking about how my background in dance on camera work informs my creative process in making live works for the stage. While all of this week's streaming events are free to the public, we are suggesting donations to a different nonprofit each night. So for tonight, I would like to promote Maine Transnet, community organization run by and for transgender folks in my home state of Maine. As the only trans-specific organization in the state, they work to create supportive, affirming community spaces for transgender Mainers through peer support groups, advocacy efforts, and cultural competency trainings. As a non-binary person who grew up in Maine with limited exposure to the LGBTQ community in general, forming community in particular, I know firsthand just how necessary the work of Maine Transnet is. So if you're looking for a way to show your appreciation for tonight's event and are financially able, we do encourage donating to Maine Transnet or to a trans-specific organization in your own hometown. So, technology in my choreographic process. I have a background in digital visual art and took a dance on camera course before ever taking any kind of like traditional dance composition course. So for me, technology has always been linked to how I choreograph and how I think about making art more broadly. Particularly interested in how the ubiquity of technology impacts the human experience, and as such, this is a common theme in my work in terms of both process and product. Tonight, we're focusing on the process side of things. So one of the more common ways that this manifests in my creative process is through the use of video editing as a choreographic tool. If you're participating in Brockport Summer Dance's film track, you just spent 2 hours with me exploring how the things we learn in dance composition courses parallel the compositional considerations of the video editing process. But what about taking our new editing skills back into the dance studio? Super straightforward example of this is a piece I made for Brockport's New Dancers Showcase back when I was in graduate school, entitled Rewind, Play, Pause, Fast Forward. This piece started out with 4 bass phrases, seen here, and go. And whenever you're ready. from there, we retrograded all 4 of the phrases, or in other words, we put them in rewind. And that was the only movement material we utilized for the entire piece. So playing only with these options of play or rewind, slow motion or fast forward, movement or While I generally tend to use a lot of projections in my work, this was my first intentional attempt at drawing inspiration from my video work without actually showing it on stage. This felt like a fairly minimalist approach, though, and I was and still am interested in how I could push that further. So, very much in process, and an admittedly somewhat abandoned process at that. But we started out the same way. Got some base material to build from. And then from there, I put it all into Adobe Premiere and just started messing with it. I knew my intention was to send it back to the dancers and ask them to learn it anew, and I was particularly interested in intentionally providing them with things that weren't humanly possible, just to see how they artistically and functionally negotiated that task. It's also worth noting that at this point in the process, we were geographically separated. So, another layer of technology that I was interested in taking advantage of was its ability to connect us regardless of physical location. Something I'm sure we're all too familiar with 2 years later in the midst of this pandemic. So, engaging in a hashtag remote, hashtag asynchronous rehearsal process before we had those buzzwords for it, I sent each dancer a customized video and asked them to learn their interpretation of it, providing them with text prompts such as how do you embody a jump cut, along with the video files. As I mentioned before, this work is still very much unfinished, and to be honest, I'm still not totally sure what the final product will look like, whether it'll be a low-tech stage piece, as I had originally envisioned, a dance film work, or just something more installation-based. But that being said, here are some rehearsal videos of the dancers negotiating the seemingly impossible task they were given. Sometimes I do like to be more explicit with my choreographic work's connection to my video work. So both rewind, play, pause, fast forward, and full screen came after a piece I made in graduate school entitled Augmental Breakdown, which similarly showcased the discrepancy between physical capabilities and technological capabilities, but in this case by directly juxtaposing the two simultaneously. Close Up and Personal, on the other hand, was a piece I made that showcased the choreographic contributions of the movement of the camera person in making a dance film. In addition to looking at the choreography of the camera, this work on close up and personal also raised questions for me about how we see so much of our world through smartphones. So, this idea of seeing and being seen, particularly through the lens of technology and social media, worked its way into my first evening length work, A Solo Machine. That section of the work was a scored improvisation based upon the two dancers' experiences being filmed by the others. However, in process, all filming and being filmed. From there, the dancers crafted set material based on their personal experiences being filmed in various sections of the piece. Beyond video work specifically, my interests expand to technology's integration into live dance performance more broadly. So while my master's is in dance, my bachelor's is in math, and though I didn't really expect to regret this given my career shift, I did unfortunately go out of my way to avoid computer science classes in undergrad. But luckily the internet exists and you can find tutorials on just about anything, including basic coding skills. So for the past few years, I've played with repurposing Xbox Kinects, Wiimotes and Wii balance boards, and Arduino electronics. You'll notice that all of those video clips were quite short, so I'm not one to be patient enough to work my way through the basics. I just kind of dove right into more advanced tutorials to get directly to the heart of what I want to know how to do. I don't know that I'd recommend this strategy since it's definitely led to more failure and frustration than it has successes. However, the experience of playing with technology in this way and bringing it into the studio has certainly inspired and informed work I've made, even if the technology itself didn't make it on stage. So, for example, this section of A Solo Machine was built with the intention of having the right hand of the downstage solo dancer being tracked by a Kinect that produced a drawing of a line that the upstage dancers responded to. While we played with this technology in rehearsal, we ultimately decided to kind of like cheat and use a preset animation in performance. However, the experience of navigating motion tracking technology certainly impacted both the movement of the dancers as well as the overall composition of this section of the work. Overall, I find technology to be a thing that impacts both the product and the process of my choreography. Such an integral part of our lives, and I enjoy indulging in that rather than trying to force the human body into this tech-free vacuum. Being said, a lot of my more recent work has diverged from this in-depth unpacking of the human-computer relationship and instead veered towards my own personal identity as a queer person. So perhaps some of that shift is functional. Now that I've graduated, I've lost easy access to space and dancers. I don't always have the funds to change that. So while I generally hate making solos on myself, that's largely what I've been doing recently. However, the solos I've made are specific to my body and to my experiences as a person assigned female at birth, as a lesbian, as a person questioning their gender identity, as a person who's unapologetically queer, even when they don't have the language for the labels that feel best. So while I don't personally care for performing and instead prefer to set work on other people, these are narratives that I don't think I can accurately put on other bodies given how personal they are. So I've been performing my own work, and it's hard, and it's uncomfortable, and it's vulnerable. But as I said during our first artist dialogue on values, queer visibility is really important to me. So I've danced in my binder, I've danced in a bright pink tank top with "Babe" written across the chest in silver letters, I've danced to Katy Perry's "I Kissed a Girl." While this may feel separate from my work with technology, I ultimately see them as related. Part of our engagement with technology is our engagement with digital media. So as an avid TV watcher and internet user, part of my struggle with accepting my own queerness stemmed from the lack of queer representation in the media I was consuming. So when all you see is cis heteronormativity, it can be really hard to accept yourself as something other. So before the pandemic hit, I was in dialogue with a close friend and collaborator about working together on an evening-length work about our differing experiences of being assigned female at birth, her as a cisgender straight woman and me as a non-binary gay person, and how popular media representation affects us as individuals as well as our platonic and romantic relationships. So while this project is unfortunately on hold for the foreseeable future, we envision it using various forms of media, from projected excerpts of influential sitcoms like Friends to audio examples like the aforementioned Katy Perry song. So with that all being said, technology impacts my process and my work in a lot of different ways. So I'm excited about that though, both in terms of what technology and media offer my final product as well as my choreographic process. We're definitely in a really unique time wherein digital collaborations and presentations are more pertinent than ever, but I'm most excited about where we go from here and then what technological methodologies transcend those pandemic necessities.
That's my video.
It's an awesome video.
Talked for 2 hours and got real rambly and was really struggling at the end. So glad I pre-recorded that.
Well, I think sometimes forcing ourselves to be succinct is challenging, and that's something that the editing process allows us to do that the live stream version maybe doesn't. And so I guess I'm wondering what the other, you mentioned in your film, you used a word discrepancy sort of between the humanness and the machineness of technology. I'm wondering what other kinds of discrepancies are interesting or provocative for you in terms of what bodies are capable of versus or in addition to what technology offers as a creative tool.
Do you mean specific, like just specific examples of that, or like other,
Yeah, I think whatever.
And other.
Yeah, I think both. I think whatever it Conjures is going to be an exciting little tidbit into like how you're seeing technology, especially in a moment where we're all learning to embrace it in more or less layers.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the first interpretation of that question,
Yep.
like specific things that I get really excited about, and I talked about this in the editing class. We just talked about like 3 different. It was very clear what my favorite was, and now probably in seeing my work, you have a better idea that I do really like getting to jump around between bodies, between locations, between movements. I have a lot of fun really, really messing with tempo,
Mm-hmm.
or like repetition of like jumps that like are like, even if we can do that action at that speed, can we do it 100 times in a row and have it look exactly the same? Like, I don't know, I've worked with some dancers that are in very good shape and they probably could, but I couldn't. So like that kind of like that idea of impossible tasks of how can you be in one space, like inside, and then in a split second you're outside, or like even if you're not doing jump cuts, like how do you embody a cross dissolve? Like what does that mean?
Right.
It doesn't mean anything, but then it's really fun to give it to different people and they all negotiate it differently. And then I think that is what's really exciting for me.
Yeah, a certain kind of abstraction without it necessarily being about the abstraction. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just I like making things in a task-based ways. People that have been taking my class, anytime we've made phrases, a lot of it has been very task-based. I give a lot of words. So for me, this is a way to have some kind of prompt that is a task that's not a word. But I usually send a nice long email with the video with some words. For the second interpretation of that question, I don't know if it totally chunks out like humans and technology and other, but I think I look at different ideas of what technology is. And I think I kind of got to this at the end of video thing of like this idea of like technology as like computers and video editing software and cameras and like these devices,
Mm-hmm.
and the coding and the programming and all of that stuff that I like to pretend I understand and I definitely don't. Versus like technology as social media and the internet and TV and movies and music.
Right.
Like you need technology for the, like it's almost like another output of technology.
Mm-hmm.
But it's related somewhere in here and haven't figured out yet what the words are for it. But it's like of like their technology, but they're different branches of it. And then so how they talk to each other, and then how either of them or that intersection talks to the dance human part of things.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm thinking about in my lifetime, which also dates me, but no one walked around with mini computers in their pocket. And so now I think that becomes less about technology and more about a functional way to interact with the world. Versus, my first cell phone, my parents gave to me on penalty of who knows, for emergencies only, right? And now that's not the way of the world. So interesting to think about the technology that we consume daily versus like the robot, sci-fi, like super heroic technology.
And I think there's something exciting in there about like to like dating yourself, like looking back time wise. I'm not that much younger, but closer in age to students. But even I started taking dance on camera class. My first one was in 2014, and we burned everything to DVDs.
Yeah.
I had a DVD slot in my laptop. You can't get that anymore.
Yep.
So
Yep.
even just like it changes so quickly. And like I think a lot of it maybe all ties into this idea of how we share it.
Mm.
I have those DVDs somewhere in a box with my undergrad things.
Right.
How would I give that to somebody versus now we have this YouTube live stream on Zoom? So like we use the internet more and that aspect of technology and like the social media to also like put these things out there.
Yeah.
Or like the attention spans of like I make a lot of like 1-minute videos for Instagram.
Right.
But nobody's going to sit and watch a 5-minute dance film on their Instagram feed. So it's also like those norms of how we engage with screens.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, and to your point about sort of the politicizing of zooming in or being a watcher, or there are the underpinnings of political feels too strong, but commentary, social commentary. Whether we're talking about the 1 minute attention span on Instagram or the constant updating and sort of like, there is maybe not the same kind of FOMO because you know what everybody's doing anytime they post, or maybe that it heightens it. I'm not sure, and I don't think we need to dive in, but I'm wondering what other themes for you start to emerge in your work. You started talking about yourself as a performing body and queerness and visibility, which reminds me to replug the donation. It's coming into the chat so that you can follow the link and donate to Maine Transnet. But yeah, let's talk about what other kinds of themes interest you. Do you start from a theme, or do you start from clips and then figure out what the work is saying? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think kind of all over the place. I think lately it's just kind of been like, it's been more theme based of like, I want to make, because I've been making work on myself and because I've been making work that's specific to me. So I think it's been started with like, what is that thing that I want to capture in this piece? But when I work with groups of people, I have focused on just like, I want to use this type of technology and I'm going to like exploit the shit out of it and figure out like, what are all the things it can do? And then kind of backtrack of like, what's exciting, what's working with this group of people in this time, in this space. And like,
right.
Logistically, like what is feasible on this timeline? I know most people listening are Brockport students. When you have 3 weeks to make a dance, like there's only so much you can do. Whereas with that longer work, which was my graduate thesis, I spent like 1.5 years on that.
Right.
So having that like luxury of time to like workshop and trial and error, I think does kind of change what my approach and what my prioritizing is. But I feel like it's usually started and bringing that into the studio, seeing what happens. And then I think themes have kind of come out of there. And then if something feels really exciting and I didn't quite get to it, or that came up, but it just wasn't the direction the piece went in, kind of cataloging that. Like when you mentioned like the FOMO and the like how we see things on screen, but also all the updates, like I've thought a lot about like what privacy means these days. So I didn't show it in that video, but have done another piece where I had like old like CRT like chunky TVs, and I went into it was a solo on a Brockport student, and I went into her apartment and like climbed up on her furniture and like took some fake surveillance video and like edited it together to look like surveillance footage, and then like putting her on stage in juxtaposition of like images of her just like washing her dishes and brushing her teeth, and like it's creepy and it's weird, but like we have those insights into people's lives.
Yeah.
But it's kind of curated by them, but then like, yeah, it raises questions. And I think it does get into social commentary, which isn't always, I'm not always interested in like taking a stance, but just kind of like, hey, we have these things in our pockets and we're on these websites, and
yeah,
these are things that I think about. And then because we're bodies, just again, what that, like going back to that juxtaposition of things.
Right. Well, I mean, and I think raising questions is a form of commentary without necessarily having a firm, like, this is my statement. It's more like, well, this is something to consider, or watch it for 2 minutes and be done with it, right? But I'm thinking about the importance then in the group work of collaboration, or in the technology's case, collaboration, right? That collaboration starts to take on sort of a whole new meaning as you make whatever kind of work you're making. So let's maybe dive into, what does collaborative work look like to you? What do you rely on? What kinds of things are inspiring to you? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think movement wise, like just before technology even gets brought in, like depending on the process, sometimes I've made works where none of the movement is mine. I might move in the studio, but it's all stuff that's like generated by dancers, or sometimes like some of the phrases will be mine, but other than these solos I've been making on myself lately, I don't think I've shown a dance that was all my movement start to finish since undergrad, and I only made one piece in undergrad. So
Well done, you. Yeah.
So which was a really interesting shift for me. Like I was too afraid, I think, to let go of control. And then I think just coming into grad school for the first piece I made, I was like, I want to challenge myself to trust other people and to let them make things. And it turns out that's a really awesome way of working. Met some really cool people and they move in ways that I don't move. And then so it's just so many more options.
Right.
Something also that I think I get excited about, but having a lot of dialogue and a lot of back and forth. Like I talk a lot in rehearsals. Anyone that's listening to this that's been in one of my processes knows that. So I think that's also just part of collaboration. Like I'll be super upfront of a like, here's the kind of technology I want to work with, or like, here's what I'm thinking about. I sat down with dancers and I was like, I don't know how to code this thing, but like, here's this cool image I saw on the internet and I'm excited about it and I'm going to figure this out. And I want to make movement tailored to that. And we'll work on the movement and then hopefully I can get my act together with the technology to catch up, or we'll do something else, but we'll still have that movement. And then for stuff like I showed that clip of some of my dancers all filming each other on the phones, like using phones in rehearsal is pretty easy because we all have them. I've bought iPhone apps for entire casts of people to be like, this is a thing I want to play with. And I'm not going to make you pay money to humor me and what I'm working on, but like, here, let me send a bunch of iTunes gifts to people. So I've done stuff like that, or like I have old phones and I'm like, here, use this one. So I like to bring stuff in and play with it. And then I like that you bring up the idea of how to collaborate with the technology, because it's very, very different. Sometimes it can be exciting when it does its own thing and you're like, that's not what I wanted, but like, that's cool. But most of the time it's frustrating and you're like, that's not what I wanted. Please do what I want you to do. And then it's always like the day of the show or the day before that it really just gives up. Or you find out like a chord you needed worked in rehearsal, but then it's not quite long enough when you get to the space. And like, so all of that is not sorry, lost my train of thought. But yeah, so it's a different type of collaboration. Like with humans, you can dialogue and have a back and forth and you can compromise. Whereas when you work with technology, the technology kind of at the end of the day is the boss.
Yeah.
Like I can code things and I can tell it what to do, but if I mess something up, like it is not gonna meet me halfway. It's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, so Sophie chatted a question for us, and I'm thinking a lot about like some of the technology that you shared or things that I know from personal experience that you've played with, that you got close and then you needed to come up with another solution.
Yeah, a lot of this.
Yeah. Part of that is improvisation, right? Part of that is your training. But what kinds of things, once you get more familiar with technology, or is there something you'd like to revisit where you're like, I was onto something? With time and money and all of the barriers that we are, slowly sidestepping for the moment, what would be exciting, or how does your work shift as you start to negotiate technology in a different way?
Yeah, so I think as far as like that improvisation and that fallback, I think because I do feel so comfortable with video editing.
Yeah.
And then also knowing that there is something nice and predictable about having a video file that's going to play same way every night. Like there's a reason I made one for this instead of word vomiting out here and then screen sharing and not screen sharing like every 5 seconds. So there is something really nice about having that set thing, which isn't always what I want choreographically, because I think I do get really interested in the idea of like live streams, or I really would like to go back and like figure out more with the Xbox Connects and those like hacked Wii controls, because like it's technology but that's meant to be used with movement.
Yes.
And it's made for video games, which I do also really like video games, but it's like, so it's fun. Like I want to get more into like repurposing, or I had a bunch of those like just short little clips of me playing with different Wii equipment, but then like, okay, then what? Like what do I do with this?
Right.
So it feels very exploratory. So I'm interested in that more interactive stuff, because that feels like it is more of like a dialogue between the people and the technology rather than like static thing, and that we pretend that we're interacting, but it's just kind of it's set. It like I like there's something to be said about, I like that it can be unpredictable, but not when it's so unpredictable then it makes me want to like chuck my computer out the window kind of unpredictable. Just to have like improvisation that is improvised dance and improvised computer, but like still like scored improvisation.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I mean, it's sort of like making site-specific work, but instead the site is something that you're sort of bringing into the space in a certain way, choreographically. And so then, depending on what kind of technology, you talked a little bit about, like final products as installations, right? That's like one category of how this might show up in a finished piece. I don't think work is ever finished, but or that you could bring all of the things together in film, or then there's this more proscenium based idea of performance, whether it's on a proscenium or not. Do you feel like you have a preference, or does it really depend on what project you're working on?
I think it depends for me, yeah, on what the thing is and like what it needs. I think because of grad school and how that went, I made a lot of stage pieces. I mentioned I'm not really interested in making dance films, but that one, I showed a bunch of clips of I called Full Screen, that I said I wasn't done with. I don't know what it's going to be.
Right.
That was designed to be a stage piece, and the more waxworks, like very much unfinished. I filled in as an understudy like day of. It was an experience. Got a lot of feedback cards, not all of them so nice, but like it was not a finished dance at all. But I think, yeah, in reflecting on those feedback cards and then kind of what I was already thinking about it for myself of like, maybe that one does need to be a film. Like I wanted it specifically to like be a low tech thing. And I was like, actually, maybe that's what it is. Installations are really exciting to me, but they also really stress me out. I've done a few like really small ones at the Experimental Film Virginia Film Festival. So I've done a lot of stuff with like the Connect and the Wiimotes there of a like, here's just like one little thing that it does.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of me choreographing a whole thing of like, just come and play with it.
Yeah.
But then it turns into a whole thing of a, like, you need a million extension cords and you need a venue and you need people, and how do you explain it to them? And like, they're touching all your equipment, or like, oh shit, it's raining and my laptop is hooked up to somebody else's very expensive projector. So it's like a trickier thing logistically, which I think can be really hard for dancers that are students, that are young, that just don't have the like support of like a Research One institution of a like, or like big name artist of like funding. Like, I don't think I really talked about it in that video, but all of this equipment can be really expensive. So I do also really like DIYing it with with iPhones, or like those Connects that I use. I got them like $40 used online, like
Sure.
the stuff we already had from the family Wii. So I do also like playing, like, yeah, if you want to do real motion tracking, don't use an Xbox Connect. Like,
Yeah, get
go into a motion capture studio with all the little
Mhm.
markers. But like, I don't have that kind of money. I don't want to travel. I can't travel right now.
Right.
So I do get really excited about the like low budget DIY thing, even though that comes with other
Challenges.
for error.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't think I ever answered Sophie's question that went in the chat. So I'll read it. How does your choreographic process change when you work with dancers who know more about the technology you're exploring in the piece? So I think, yeah, I have a couple of different answers to that. So I've definitely worked with people that have never done anything like this before, and that can be fun, just to be like, hey, we're gonna try it. And everybody's historically has always been super game for it, super patient with me. They're nice when I get mad at my computer. And then I've worked with some dancers year after year after year who then become more familiar with this. And then you're not starting at that square one. So you can kind of, their assumptions are already made, which can be really exciting also to build off of those. So I think they're just, I don't know that it really changes what I do or what I make, but just more, I guess, where I have to start.
Mm.
I still kind of want to end up at the same place. That one close up and personal that I showed with the first one of somebody filming somebody else with an iPhone.
Yep.
That girl is a photographer, so she was already very comfortable. She'd never done this kind of thing before, but she was very comfortable holding a camera. And
Right.
that out of her. And we could start with like how to frame something
Yep.
in a box. Like that was already a skill that she had. So it wouldn't be that I couldn't do that with somebody else, but just takes up some of the prep work, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and then more trust maybe that you can immediately bestow upon your collaborators, right? Like, oh, you know how to do this. What now you decide what's possible as opposed to figuring out what's possible together. I'm wondering, as a like final shot, Cass, if you have, I'm thinking about the sort of historicalness of like as technology has presented itself, there's a whole group of postmoderns and probably people that I'm not even thinking of before that, like Merce Cunningham using life forms to make these impossible phrases and then asking dancers to create them, or Trisha Brown walking with projection and playing with those kinds of things. But who are you looking at now, or what kinds of, if we're interested in seeing more work like this, do you have people or venues, or like where is this happening? Who's doing cool stuff that is inspiring to you or you think we should know about?
Yeah, I'm like the worst at that kind of question, which is bad.
No, it just means that you're making your own.
Well, I feel like I should probably be more aware of what's going on, but
Yeah.
I do think an exciting part about the internet, I don't have the money to go to New York City to like see who's cool showing work at their fancy venues with all their projectors. So I do really like, yeah, like Jolie sent me a film link this morning.
Uh-huh.
That's really cool. I didn't know who any of those people were, but like now I'm like, cool, I'm gonna go check out their things. We're gonna watch it in class on Saturday. So I think I get excited, oh yeah, about just like random, almost like not no names, but like just kind of just everyday people that are maybe also doing this DIY thing that just stumble across it. So Bridgman Packer they've come to Rochester a few times. I saw them at NAS last year maybe. So they're a married couple. I've met them. I've stayed at their house. They're very sweet people.
But in Albany?
They do really cool stuff. They use Isadora software a lot, which is another thing that like I pretend I know how to use it, but like definitely don't. But I've used it for things. Hasn't stopped me. But it's a really fun like projection interactive stuff. So they do a lot of stuff with live feeds. They do before a lot of their shows, they'll do what they call like video playground.
Mm-hmm.
So you can come and you get to play with that technology yourself and you get to move around and you see kind of how it works in an experiential way, not in a like, here's the computer software, QLab
Right.
setup, whatever. And then you get to go actually see it in performance and how they've co-opted that in like a controlled manner for different choreography. So I really appreciate that, like their work, but then also that introductory, like sharing installation format of a like, hey, we made this thing, but also like we're gonna kind of let you in behind the scenes and that educational component
Mm-hmm.
that goes with it. I think I think this work can get really weird and really avant-garde, and I really get excited about that, but I get that it's not always maybe the most accessible to non-avant-garde postmodern dance audiences. So then like how do you get other people to be like, this is cool, you don't have to like get weird abstract dance, but you can still see the relevance and you can be like, oh, like I did that, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
oh, I know what I had to do to like make my image double like that on the screen, like so that kind of thing I think can be really exciting. So I appreciate that approach
Mm-hmm.
of theirs.
Yeah, I do think that there's something about utilizing people's tech. I mean, here we are back at the beginning, but utilizing people's savvy with technology. People have smartphones. People have access to scrolling images, or sort of like giving people handholds into grounding them in what they already know, and then inviting them into a more abstract or avant-garde or whatever those words mean world with you, rather than pushing into something without a frame of reference or a context. So Bridgman Packer is definitely a cool a duo of work. And I mean, there are certainly plenty of people making. I just didn't know. I mean, it doesn't even have to be technological, right? But like, I love that what I'm hearing from your answer is that everyone is making really cool stuff because we're all walking around potentially with these little tiny computers. And then just posting and seeing what lands and sharing feels like a good place to start. Anything else we should know about you or your technological process or a parting word of wisdom before we sign off?
We talk for 3 hours now, so probably know most of what you want to know. You can follow me on my Instagram account.
There you go.
That one is definitely much more active. But yeah, I post little dance videos on those because I do think there's something exciting, like you of like everybody's making stuff. So does everything need to have like an evening like New York City, Manhattan premiere? Or
Right.
can it just be a little thing you put on the internet and like that's the piece? So I do like sharing things that way. I like seeing what other people are making. So yeah, excited about playing with new venues and kind of just reinterrogating what it means to show work. So I think, yeah, I guess that would be my parting wisdom. Like just go make stuff and put it on the internet and no one has to adjudicate you, adjudicate yourself, and then people will share it and they will like it and it'll be fun.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. That especially in a moment where we're not traveling or we're not touring or we're talking about really sort of heavy issues around sort of who's paying for what or who's curating what and these larger conversations that are happening nationally and internationally. Yeah, you make things that you're excited about and you put them out in all these platforms that we use every day potentially. Yeah, so tell us your Instagram handle so that we can find you.
Oh yeah. So I wow, this is bad. I think my public dance one, you've been linking it a lot on the Brockport one. So if I mess this up, there's the real links. But the professional is just CB Dance Project.
Mhm.
All lowercase, all one word, no punctuation, none of that. And then my personal one that has some dance things, and then also like I bartend, so like laughs about beer and a lot of cat pictures. Is just Cas dot Burns Burns. So period in between.
Got it. Well, Cass, thanks so much for taking the time to build a film for us, to share a little bit, to humor me with my questions. I'm sure there's a historical part of you that is ready for me to be done asking you questions. And I'm so excited that we have one more opportunity to hang with you in a film class. And then lots of opportunities, hopefully, to follow you on Instagram and see all your cool little short dance videos.
Oh yeah, thanks for letting me chat and teach and talk about things.
My pleasure,
Exciting.
always.